Welcome to the second webinar in the Reuse Design, third webinar in the Reuse Design Leaders series, focused on designing and building with reclaimed interior materials and furnishings. My name is Simona Fisher, and I'm an architect and sustainability director with MSR Design in Minneapolis. This series is hosted by Hennepin County Department of Environment and Energy and developed in collaboration with the University of Minnesota Center for Sustainable Building Research and supported by a fantastic group of project partners from around the country. AIA and GBCI credits are available for this presentation for those who are tuning in live today. So if you signed up for that when you registered, you should receive a notification of your credits and GBCI certificate if you requested that. So this webinar series is a follow-up to the Project Manager's Guide to Material Reuse in Commercial Buildings, which is a resource to help owners, architects, and contractors integrate reclaimed materials on commercial scale projects. And that's available for download at this link, and we'll be sharing the slides. And right now, we're in phase 2 with a grant from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency to address specific barriers that AEC teams face when trying to implement reuse on commercial scale projects. We have 3 parallel efforts. They are working with AEC professionals, a training for entrepreneurs to develop reclaimed materials businesses, and hosting workshops with commercial scale property owners. Today, we are talking about interior materials and furniture. We will discuss different reuse pathways. We have a couple of case studies on furniture reuse. And we have a case study of a living building challenge project with multiple interior material streams. Go ahead and use the Q&A and we'll take questions at the end. And we're also keeping the chat open. So presenters, you are welcome to answer questions using the reply function if you like during the presentation. So we've talked in previous sessions about how using reclaimed materials in the design of new projects takes both technical skills and to understand how to plan in detail, and also a different mindset than typical project delivery with all new materials. When we talk about technical, we're talking about things like knowing how to do a deconstruction pre-audit, where you catalog available materials prior to renovation, or creating a material reuse and deconstruction plan that plots the pathway of a reclaimed material from source to refurbishment to reinstallation, or knowing how to write specs for bidding reclaimed materials. We also talk about having the right mindset for reuse, because the process is just a bit different when you embrace the fact that your aesthetic is partly driven by what types of materials you are able to find. So as designers, we can't just envision a palette and drop it for others to execute. It may mean being open to design input from other project partners who are helping to scout the materials. And there can be this back and forth process. You think one element is figured out, but then you find out that it doesn't go with this other piece. So you have to search for a new option for the first piece again. And there just can be a little more back and forth than we're used to with kind of straight new design. And at some point, you're probably going to have to get creative and figure it out when skeptics tell you that reuse isn't feasible on your project. And we all know there are going to be doubters and skeptics, because remember that our entire economic and cultural system right now is designed to make you and your clients want new stuff all the time. So in fact, it is an act of resistance to choose reuse. You may need to get help. You may need to help your project team members or your clients see that reclaimed materials can be used to create rich, beautiful spaces and that look and feel fresh and work for today's needs. And I think, in fact, helping people envision what is possible is not just our job, but it's the actual role of designers and design thinkers in society. So It's kind of a big vision. I want to add another slice to the pie in terms of the core necessities for successful reuse on commercial scale projects, also very helpful on residential projects, and that is having good reuse partners. It's key to have the design team and contractor on board with those mindset pieces, but an integrated reuse supplier can really help smooth the integration of new and salvage materials from planning to bidding to installation. This is a diagram I've shared previously that illustrates different pathways material reclamation can take. So you have uh, path A, things might come from the same project site and client and just be cycled right back into that project. You might have an owner who has multiple properties and they might have a warehouse, or maybe they just have other things in another location that you could consider for reuse when renovating. A contractor or third-party connector can be a great source of reuse. Contractors often are doing demolition at the same time they're doing construction on a different project, and they might know what's coming down around a city or a location. Reuse centers path D, I think that's one that a lot of us are familiar with, or maybe our clients are familiar with, where it's kind of an eclectic collection of different things. They might have a lot of stock, it might not be matching. And then this idea of an integrated reuse supplier, path E. And in particular, I think furniture reuse, especially at commercial scale, is probably most successful via Path E. So our first two presenters today are here to share different strategies and processes they use in their respective practices for working reclaimed furniture into commercial and institutional projects. So I will introduce our first speaker, and you can go ahead and take the screen share. Kelly Boonstra is the Workplace Solutions Director at Right Size Facility in Chicago, a reclaimed and new furniture consultant with a sister company, Reclaimed Materials Showroom. Kelly has over 10 years of experience in the office design industry, shaping interior workspaces for corporate offices, K-12 and higher ed, and healthcare facilities, and collaborating with manufacturers, architects, designers, and project managers to create spaces that inspire and perform. Kelly, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here and share a little bit more about how I can help improve the environment and create beautiful spaces. So, as Simona said, I work for Right Size Facility, and we have been in the business for just about over 20 years now. But I wanted to share, so within our company, we Workwell Ventures is our parent company. And within that, like she had mentioned, Office Furniture Center is our sister company, a showroom. We have 45,000 square foot showroom just south of the city of Chicago, where we refurbish furniture. I'll share a little bit more about that later, and some case goods about projects we've done with them. And Right Size Facility, we're the office furniture dealership, so we also partner with new manufacturers, of course, sustainably sourced and responsible partners in the industry. We're a 9-aligned dealer, so what's nice about that is with my design, my passion and design background, I'm able to really utilize and curate solutions for clients with multiple different options to get creative and be responsible. And within our Workwell family of companies, we also have a non-union install team. So we're able to source that locally, and they're all under one house over there at Office Furniture Center. And then we also partner with furniture finders. So again, to make sure that that what we're reusing is nationwide, we're able to give back and still deliver that like new look of furniture for a fraction of the cost. So we are the pioneers of office furniture eco-friendly decommissioning since 2004. So we started doing furniture liquidation and kind of have grown into a dynamic furniture dealer. What's unique about that and what's I feel so passionate about, and it sets us apart, is that we are able to take what we've decommissioned. So, for instance, we did the Allstate offices in Northbrook here in Chicago, 15 buildings full of brand new all steel furniture that was installed right before COVID and then taken out after. And we're still refurbishing, selling that furniture, and giving it a new home. So what's awesome about that is we're able to find a new home for those type of furnishings. Again, if they don't fit the exact look of what they're going for, we can refurbish them and recover them in a fabric of their choice. But we're able to help clients understand what they have, what they want and want to reuse, and be able to reuse that. Like Simona had said, in the reuse pathway, like, okay, maybe they're doing some construction, so they need to decommission the existing, so construction can happen, and we store that during that decommission or during that construction phase, and then bring it back in and implement it into the new furniture or pre-owned furniture later. And what our goal is to divert anything going to landfill. We're looking at 95% diversion. So, we're partnering with local recyclers. We're providing a certificate of this is how much water we've recycled. This is how much plastic, metal, wood. And we're providing that to clients. And you can kind of see, over the last 22 years now, we've made an impact. So it's just really great to see. It's great to be part of that. And again, still creating beautiful spaces, but being able to be responsible with that. And so Office Furniture Center is our pre-owned showroom, pre-owned office furniture showroom. So again, a lot of our inventory comes from our decommissioning. And so I've shared some images of our showroom, chairs galore. It's like a candy store of office furniture. We refurbish Herman Miller AO2 and Ethos Space workstations in-house. So you can, the steel bones, or we call them the good bones, the steel frames will be able to reuse. You'll be able to pick your fabric, or clients can pick their fabric. So still kind of customizable. And then new surfaces, and like I'm going to show you an example where they did painted pre-owned storage within the workstation. So very creative ways to, again, meet any timeline, any budget. And it's all done in-house. And we also have pre-owned workstations that, go through that 10-point inspection, as well as seating, making sure cylinders are working properly, arm pads aren't ripped. Whatever it is, it does get love and is like new before we implement it into projects. This is my little guy. He comes in over the summer with me, and we happen to have a baby grand piano, so that was fun for him. And he was serenading the whole showroom. But it's a great resource that I'm able to bring clients to, and I'll show you some examples of that later within the presentation. So I did want to kind of talk through our delivery process. And again, we meet with clients, a consultative approach to understand their budgets, their timeline, and then the aesthetic. And then we come up with creative ways to make that work. So we'll help, if they're on a tight budget, obviously, we're looking at some pre-owned options. I'm perusing, there's a website that you can peruse, and I'm always looking on there for some fun stuff. There's a lot of fun, like lounge and things that we can incorporate, so really create that look. And I'm thinking of that off the top, even if it's a Fortune 500 company. We work with clients, 5,000 to 50,000 square feet. The smaller, the bigger, and I'm always thinking, how can we be responsible? How can we make this work? Because at the end of the day, you can do all new, like laminates if you want to make sure those match, but then maybe you're implementing pre-owned seating, so you're saving the environment, you're reusing, finding something a new home and implementing that in. So you can see we try to start there and see what we have that might work for them, and working that into our projects and having that conversation, because it is so important to think about and make sure we're acting on on what we're talking about. So,
Kelly, I just wanted to note you're at halfway.
perfect. Thank you. Um, so we do have great resources. We kind of go through a process for our moves that kind of helps guide clients, guide project managers, industry partners, and it gives you kind of a breakdown of like understanding the client's needs, talking through them, walking through their space. Back to the decommissioning, we do a full inventory of their existing, and we help. Okay, this is going to be reused in the new space. This is going to be donated. This will go back to be resold, and we might offer a credit toward to offset the cost of the removal. So we'll help figure that out and basically document what we have versus what we need, and then have me delta. I'm sure you've done that before, but it's all in an attempt to make sure that we're utilizing what we can and then implementing that into the new. And again, reaching that under 5% is going to a landfill, which a lot of our manufacturer partners are also making sure that their scraps are going, being recycled and donated. And this will be shared, so there is a link to that checklist if you guys want to check that out. And then here's some examples of some great projects that I've implemented pre-owned into. This particular project was with a property management company, creating a spec suite that we needed to be under $20 a square foot. So we got really creative with some great premium pre-owned. You see we have some high tower, we have some Vitra lounge, and we were able to, these are install shots kind of on the side there. There's another slide here where we've implemented a Knoll antenna benching station, pre-owned steel case lounge, and then we've incorporated some new that blends really beautifully with the pre-owned. So, and then pre-owned lounge seating, or excuse me, test seating. So just again, another way to blend the solutions to create, something that meets the timeline, meets the budget. Here's another one, and you can see in the image here, we brought flooring samples out to help kind of finalize some of the lounge pieces in the space. So jumping into, you can see this is kind of under the steel racks, and we were able to incorporate that into the space. We did refurbished ethos space for them. So you can see how with our project typical development, we've included renderings to kind of bring that to life, and then bring them into the showroom to finalize the fabric. And we were able to utilize pre-owned mobile storage for them. So again, another way to incorporate that pre-owned into the project. Another project we did here in Chicago, we set up a mock-up of these 12x9 workstations. We joked and said, how much are you charging for rent for these? Really large, but we were able to set up a mock-up, and they surprised us with we need to be in within 4 weeks. So we had about 400 panels created within 2-3 weeks, with some delays on fabric, and we were able to make it work. So again, getting creative, getting down and dirty. This reception desk was actually the one on the showroom at the Mart's floor, and when they closed for Neocon, they are moving to Fulton Market. So we were able to, and there's a few other people on my team that have incorporated their existing showroom furniture into their projects. And we were able to really nicely add some storage in the back and create a U-shaped reception desk. So we do work with our manufacturer partners to make sure that furniture is utilized and resold and finds a new home. And then the last project I wanted to share with you is a community center here on the south side of Chicago. These are some install shots and some close-ups of like where we found a sofa up in the steel, and we wanted to make sure we liked the blues with the recliner in the space. So it's just a really great way to get in there. It's raw, you're getting dirty, you're finding finishes that work with the new furniture. The next image is the same project. So you can see the client found this sofa, jumped up in there and was like, I have to have it. So I know I'm running out of time, so I'll kind of cruise through, but we were just down and color coding where we wanted greens, and this was reused from a project we did commissioned and then reused it in their space. So again, I get to work with really awesome clients. Like right now we're working with a homeless shelter. We're finding creative solutions for them and even offering potential donations. So again, creating projects that meet that timeline, meet that budget, but again, are being responsible, reusing furniture where we can. Um, and I think it shows our passion for being responsible. It shows we want to make this work for you. And then I was just going to touch on warranties, but again, we're here as the consultant, we're here to find solutions that work. Obviously, with pre-owned, you don't get much of a warranty, but we do stand behind our product and make sure that if they do have any issues, we'll come out and assess those and see what needs to happen. And I've, had a lot of repeat clients that come back because they love our approach and our ability to really create a space for them. So I'm very excited to be here today and learn more about what everyone else is doing and be part of the change. So thank you guys for your time.
Thanks so much, Kelly. That was fantastic, and I really enjoyed when we chatted about just understanding how I have this impression of furniture selection process and specification being very just like spreadsheets and having it be this tactile experience of climbing around in a showroom. Sounds really cool. Our next speaker, Karen Ogier, is a leader in the world of reclaimed furniture. Karen is an architect and director of furniture planning at Kimiko Designs, where she helps clients navigate complex workplace and healthcare projects through strategic planning, stakeholder alignment, and thoughtful execution. With more than 25 years of experience spanning architecture, interiors, project management, and consulting, she has built a career out of expanding traditional practice boundaries. Through Kimiko Green, she advances structured approaches to decommissioning and furniture lifecycle planning that align environmental responsibility with professional practice leadership. Karen, please go ahead.
Thank you. It says we're having difficulty loading your presentation. Of course. Let me stop sharing and try that one more time. Oh, wait, I think it's up. Do you see it?
Yep, we see it.
Great. Okay, perfect. Thank you for the warm welcome. Very happy to be here. Again, Karen Ogier with Kimiko Designs. And this, Kelly, that was a great tee up. So we also work in the furniture realm, and we are furniture planners. So we're really on the consulting and advisory side. And about 4 years ago, we noticed that all of our clients were asking us the same question, which is, how do I not throw this out? This being a chair, a desk, some other item that they had that they needed to get rid of. And that was really the birth of Kimiko Green, which is our sort of initiative and community that brings together owners who are really trying to answer this question for themselves and for their companies. Most of what we have learned in the past 4 years is that our job is really to help educate and communicate. When people started asking this question, we really started to dig in, ask more questions, do research, and try to figure out how can we make reuse, how do we keep it out of the landfill, how can we make reuse easy? Because if we can't make it easy, the likelihood of people doing it is just much smaller. So over the past few years, we've developed a lot of ways to communicate our process to owners and other end users. Things like a decision tree. How can I approach this object? Is it in good condition? Do we want to use it? And that would sort of drive you to some different solutions or opportunities, some of which I think Kelly also touched on. So reuse, reconfiguration, resale, donation, recycling. And once you pick that pathway, It's helping to develop sort of a roadmap for how to actually execute. So we start here, we evaluate, so on and so forth. But after a couple of years of this, we start to see kind of the results. And so we have some case studies that we'll share as well. Also, as part of that education, it's helping people understand before they really embark on this, what are the pros of reuse? We found that a lot of people really, they will consider reuse when it will shorten the procurement timeline versus new, because you already have the material or the product, and cost. How can we leverage the material that we already own to maybe offset some savings for an area in which we really want to spend money? And then we also want to talk about what you need to know when you're starting reuse or thinking about reuse. To make it easy, you really want to work with items that are in good condition, and maybe prioritize those first, because there is a cost associated with repair, cleaning, reupholstering. Storage space can be a concern for some owners as well. And you really do want to plan it up front. It's, as with most things, a little upfront planning can go a long way in making some of these objectives achievable. So this is a case study from a project we worked on a few years ago with Sony in California. And it was a predominantly new project, so meaning they purchased a lot of new items, but they had some items that had been very lightly used. This was just post-COVID, and they elected to reuse almost $250,000 of task seating to help them afford some other pieces in the project that they might not normally be able to purchase. So those really high impact, one-off, unique items. They're very design oriented, very visual. So they were very concerned about all the items that they were going to use on the project. And we found a lot of other opportunity for them to reuse product as well. So the two things that people were really interested in as we started preparing these case studies are the landfill diversion and trying to understand what that weight looks like, as well as that cost savings. So here's an example of what this looks like sort of as you go through the process and what that result is. They've reused plants. They reused those Knoll generation chairs. They reused lounge seating and coffee tables, side tables. There's a lot of ancillary product in addition to that task seating, but because the space was very eclectic, I always like to say, spot the reuse item. It's really hard. And again, this furniture was still in good condition, so it really blends seamlessly. It's hard to tell. This is another project that was shared by one of our Kamiko Green members. And it is for a bank, and pretty much everything you see in the photos was reused. So the conference tables and chairs, the demountable walls that were already in the space, the workstation panels, case goods in the private offices, guest seating, training tables, and chairs. Again, when you're working with an enterprise client, sometimes they really do have a lot of resources to be able to tap into to reuse that product. Now I'm going to show you something that looks a little less polished, but nonetheless resulted in a tremendous amount of savings for a higher ed client, as well as a pretty impressive landfill diversion. It was a consolidation of departments into a building, and this is what the before looks like. When we talk about storage, this project, all the furniture was just sort of piled up in empty rooms. And the challenge was, how do we take this product out of storage and put it together in a way that makes sense, so that it doesn't feel so random and jumbled. And we had to actually create a process. And I think for this project, the process was almost as important as the product, because they didn't really have a method to be able to make sense of all the inventory. And what we created for them was an installation manual. So by room, just understanding the dimensions of the room and the shape, what type of product would need to be, or to fit, what product would fit best in this room. So I know the example is a little small, but this shape office really requires a left-handed desk, task chair, and maybe two guest chairs. And so we had to tell the movers, we want to find a desk that looks like this, and we need some matching chairs and a good task chair. And so we really had someone looking at plans, looking at the manual, watching furniture be unloaded from this room, and saying, hey, we have 6 offices, we have this number of desks, these are all similar, we're going to put them all here to make this work and make it look more cohesive. This is another example where we worked with a client who had an existing space, they had existing product. They're like, we like the product, we just don't like the shape, it doesn't work for us. And so this was an opportunity to actually order some new parts and pieces, sort of a reconfiguration. So all of our work surfaces were reused, the task seating, the personal storage, and we really just supplemented with new panels. And for the same client, they had an office that was really just training desks. They liked the training desks. They were using them as workstations, but they wanted privacy. So here's an opportunity where we recommended remanufactured product. So product that has been in service and decommissioned, and then reupholstered or repainted to meet their requirements. And they're very happy with it. And I want to make sure we're doing okay on time.
I just wanted to give you a time check, and we actually just have like 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I need to talk faster. Okay. So my last case study is a project for MD Anderson. This is an ongoing project. It's a 4-year reshuffle. So we are moving chairs, desks, people into swing spaces. And this really did require a number of new tools to communicate how to do this reuse process. We use a lot of Smartsheet to look at inventory, and it is very much a room by room and item by item move. And Simona, you mentioned having some flexibility. Here's an example of where we write specs to say a black task chair will suffice. It could be either of these 2 models. And that speeds up sort of the process by building in that flexibility. And all of that is really to improve the visibility to the team members so that they know what to expect and they know what's showing up. And we've had the opportunity to put that all together and share out a lot of information for them related to their reuse. So, we'd urge everyone to consider getting started when you're planning or decommissioning. Think about reuse. There's a great opportunity. You can put those pieces in casual collaboration zones, sprinkle them within, and also look at high volume items to really get started. That's a quick win.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Karen. I'm going to just, in the interest of time, keep right on moving. I'll introduce our next 2 presenters. Andrea Love, FAIA, is a principal and director of building science at Payette and has worked on 6 recent COTE Top 10 award-winning projects. At Payette, she integrates building performance into projects, leads internal research efforts, and develops publicly available tools and resources. She's a lecturer at MIT and Harvard on building performance and past chair of the AIA 2030 Working Group. Mickey Chapa is an architect and member of Payette's Building Science Group who works on comprehensive carbon reductions through energy modeling, life cycle assessment, material health, and the circular economy at scale. He co-chairs a circular economy research group at Payette, participates in Carbon Leadership Forum, and is currently on the AIA 2030 Working Group. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you. I don't have the slides up. I don't know if others can see them, but
Yeah, we can see them.
okay. Well, I can't. So
Interesting.
I'm happy if Nikki, if you can just, I guess, control them, then I can't. I don't know why it's not working now, but I can just talk through. Yeah. Okay.
You could try unsharing and resharing and see if it helps.
I'll try that.
Sorry for the technical difficulties.
Not the first time.
And it works so well in our, tech run through.
Of course.
Let's try again.
That worked. Thank you. Okay, great. So, and are they advancing? Perfect. Okay.
Yep.
So just a quick overview of who we are. We are a 180-person firm located in Boston. We're one office, so a large firm, but kind of integrated into one studio on one floor. So it allows us to really collaborate. And we focus on just science and healthcare buildings, so very high technology, carbon intensive buildings. And we were fortunate enough to win the AIA Firm Award in 2019 for our focus on the fusion of design and performance. And so this whole notion of reuse and the design opportunity, as well as sustainability and kind of carbon story that comes from it, fits, I think, very nicely within that. And so Mickey and I are both, as Simona mentioned, are both part of the building science group. And we have 3 kind of main roles in the office. The first is really integrating building performance information into our design process, into our projects, and kind of making sure that we are grounding their performance in things that really work. Leading internal research. So as Mickey mentioned, we have a group that's been looking at reuse and circularity in particular. And really that is so that things that we see or challenges that we may have in projects, but don't really have time necessarily to like delve into and unpack in that, typical design schedule, allows us to kind of take that time outside of the design process, knowing it'll pay dividends for our projects going forward. And then the last kind of task we have is really supporting firm knowledge and initiatives around sustainability and building performance. And so there are 5 of us in the group. Nikki and I are 2 of those individuals, but really everybody in this group has contributed to this work. And I think when we look at embodied carbon, it is often the focus really is often on kind of the envelope and structure, which are a significant percentage of the embodied carbon of overall building. But because of the churn rate and that kind of frequency that fit outs may happen in spaces, so this was a project we were working on that had a 15-year lease. And so, in the 60-year lifespan of the building, that space could get redone from the interior standpoint 4 times. And that can actually add up over the life of the building to really being very similar in carbon to the structure and envelope. And so there's really importance, I think, in also focusing around the embodied carbon reduction for interiors. And when we think about the priorities, like many people here, we came to this really as a strategy that came to reuse really as one of the best strategies we have to really drive down carbon emissions, right? These carbon emissions for things that already exist have been put out. And so, repurposing and kind of incorporating reuse is a key way to really drive down those strategies. And so one example of a project where, again, had very high sustainability aspirations. It was our first lab that was pursuing Living Building Challenge, where we really wanted to, it was a renovation of an existing building, but we're really interested in how we could kind of incorporate reuse and really minimize the carbon emissions associated with that. And so we started, like many have said, with this kind of pre-building audit to identify what are the opportunities of things in the project that we could either donate, reuse, or find it, divert from the landfill. And so we had this pre-building audit where we identified a number of different items that could potentially have the opportunity to be reused. Like many things, not everything ultimately got reused. There were certain things in those kind of bright pink where we were able to actually fully reuse them within the renovation that we were doing. There were some where we were able to use some of it, the kind of lighter pink, but not all of those, all of the items. And then there were things that we identified, like fume hoods, where we were actually able to divert those to a different building, some lab equipment. Additionally, we were able to kind of take some of those items, and while we weren't able to find a good reuse place for them, but we were able to kind of divert them from the landfill through recycling, either through a manufacturer recycling program or sorting them out so that those materials could be reused. And so some were success in terms of getting that reused, not everything, but we tried to do our best to really divert as much as we can. And sort of some of the lessons learned that we took from this project that actually is going to, I think, inform the case study that Nikki's going to go into some more detail on is like how the kind of technical requirements. There are lots of things that in theory seem great to reuse, but some of the kind of actual implementation of how do you take it apart, how do you store it, and then how do you put it together. And the defects that can come from that process and the sort of, we had this great notion of really trying to reuse the raised access flooring, but when we actually we did a mock-up on trying to how we would put that back together, there was a lot of, uneven surfaces and other things that actually made it quite challenging. So there were many lessons learned on how do we both, identify things that can really be reused.
Great. Thanks, Andrea. And just to answer a question that had come through in the chat, there wasn't a lot of lumber on that project. Yeah, the project that we're gonna look through, not in great detail, but just sort of skim through some of the strategies and the highlights that we found while evaluating this project. So it's a large lab, the greater Boston area, again, well over 500,000 square feet, made up of half offices, 40% wet labs, 10% TBD. One of the kind of interesting opportunities for the project was that is consolidating multiple buildings into one central location. So those are key to us that like we think we probably had a fair amount of resources just beyond the project sort of grasp. So we kept had kind of continued to ask and prod, and you'll see how that happened throughout the project. So one of the other things, again, Andrea mentioned the churn that which interiors have. With a more innovative lab and a more innovative client, then they are going to want to keep and stay at the fore. So that we were even more concerned about the churn rate for this project. But that said, we were very grateful to have a supportive team. Aligned from the owner. I think again, this is like very important. Private project, so we did have a little bit more flexibility with how we do the specifications. We'll talk a little bit about how that played out too. But everyone is still cost conscious. So while we did have the opportunity to identify particular products, in the interest of bidding and competition, had to strategize different ways to open up to more. So, but the framework we used, the LBC materials pedal framework, which for the size of this project required 30 salvage items of 10 different categories. So, we knew that we were going to have to look deeply and look carefully to sort of like hit this target. So This was just a framework in increasing specificity with which you can sort of like evaluate the project. It's the process that we had walked through. First to define it, set the targets. That was like our 30 quantity. Then go out and find it on the market. Open it up by allowing it in the specifications, like just having uh, that first awareness and placement in the documents, and then demand it in specific locations, and then again, kind of keep trying. So the first part, using that LBC framework, is that salvage is defined as something that has been used in a building before. So that sort of, while these might be great strategies, attic stock cutoffs, significantly reconstituted materials don't count. So you can see some of the spec language for how we identify that. Uh, and then also to note, adding in a little line about salvage or reclaimed, being open to the different nomenclature, I think was something that we wound up going back to when talking with the contractor or talking with different trade partners to kind of be clear about what is and is not included. So, and part of our initial conversations with our client involved like just really high level looking at like what is very important to them. Are there any institutional or cultural resources that you want to carry forward into this project? We looked at signage or branding. For us, we were looking at high embodied carbon assemblies. We also are looking at products at the end of life that have better take back programs. Or any products that have extremely high first cost, abundant modular elements. Eventually, someday, we would love to see building systems and MEP included in this. These lab projects are very intensive with their MEP. So, are there commodities that we could start to ask about? We had conversations with the construction manager, and they talked to their trade partners and the unions, who said that they wouldn't reuse different receptacles. So we were kind of bouncing around, seeing what edges we could find in our initial research and what pathways would ultimately play out in the project. So we built on past successes. We developed.
Mickey,
Yes.
just to
Yeah.
interrupt, I seem to still have controls and I'm doing my best to keep up, but you might want to take them back.
Okay. Thanks. So yeah, we had developed some tools inside in our office to talk with other projects as we're sort of like getting this information. I think for others, the allforreuse.org website is something similar. So I highly recommend that if you're looking for resources. What we also found was anyway, this is our the list of strategies that we wound up, kind of going after. And one like kind of important concept to take away from this process for us was that we didn't know exactly what we were going to be able to get. We didn't know how successful we were going to be at the end of the day. So that uncertainty led to responsibilities for everybody. So going through and seeing what's in the purview of the owner with the design team or the contractor, and then kind of continuing to have conversations throughout the design process.
And this was an
So,
early design tool that we used to kind of, as Mickey mentioned, we had a requirement of a minimum of 30 salvage materials to get our LBC core certification and material pedal. And we, as he said, we had no idea on how we were going to get there. And so this was actually a way to kind of be like, okay, everybody's going to go and do some research and think about it. And you can see now the source, like that part didn't exist at the time. It was more of like, what are some options and what do we think we could do as a way to start the conversation and kind of refine over time and understand where we might be able to get some of these items.
sure. And then, ultimately, it didn't happen. So there were many things that had either fell off the table due to availability or familiarity. And we'll talk to a little bit about each one of those, some of those key strategies that land on this list. So first and foremost, build on your strengths. We knew this is a lab project with thousands of pieces of high cost lab equipment. There's multiple reasons and research for why that product was coming forward, but we made it a priority, and this is something that we could highlight in the project and the project success story. And also not just that it was the lab equipment, but other things on their, their inventory, including refrigerators or plastic partitions, things that might not normally have had a perceived value by having these conversations, and we were able to sort of expand on that list. So then, kind of getting into the specs and the drawings, just kind of recalling the first webinar, just just getting out of bed, just putting in the specs, making it an available option. So one of the ways that we did that was with insulation. We had a small insulation buildup in the basement, and we looked at 3 manufacturers. We found that it's feasible. We kind of grateful that what some of these large reclaimed insulation providers were local. However, and then they also were at cost. However, our specifications were very friendly, very light, subject to compliance, subject to availability, maybe incorporated. We didn't quite know that this was possible. The timeline was really hard, and ultimately we didn't have enough quantity. The contractor wasn't. It was one of the first submittals that came through on a very fast track project, so the timeline was hard, was difficult. So that was a challenge. However, using pretty much the same language and the same approach, just being open to it, we were able to, I see AJ Ellsworth on the call. Thank you for being an integrated reuse partner that, was willing to have conversations with us, was ready to participate in the bidding process as we went. And so while just, again, allowing these reclaimed doors, inviting them into the process, including them as an allowable provider in your specifications, brought them to the table. And it was great. It was honestly really, really great experience. These are some of the products that, this is part of the submittal process. These were the doors, kind of commodity doors. And then we wound up getting 52 doors out of the 1,400 or so on the project. So not insignificant, but or not, not the majority, but still grateful. So I'll try to go through these quickly too, or kind of on time too. But I think, even if you are in an open bid project, like there are still moments when you can specify exactly what you want. Like reclaimed wood, we know is available and maybe at cost. And as long as your team and clients and everyone are on board with like what that might, how that might impact your project, spell it out. So it's kind of a magical moment for our designers to like put it into the drawings where, from wood tread to salvage wood tread, and that changes something, and then we, can have like a knock-on effect with the rest of the design team and the ownership. So a simple example, but I think it was pretty important for our process. So we had the signature stair that meandered through the floor plate of the building, and then we were also once familiar with that process, able to extend it into an adjacent seat wall, an adjacent bench, some adjacent paneling. So like it had knock-on effects once we started having conversations. Had a sample. This was from Longleaf Lumber. They had another partner that was able to kind of communicate very clearly through the traditional bidding process. We had salvage stone and wood, reclaimed lockers.
I was going to say,
So,
you're doing okay on time, actually, because
okay.
a lot of questions are getting answered in the chat. So
Excellent.
don't
Excellent.
rush.
Okay. One of the other strategies, again, it's a fit out. It's sort of like an existing building, to be mindful of the things that might otherwise just get thrown away. So by bringing importance to things like other commodity doors, can we just move them? Like, do you need to throw them away? Probably not. So, we identified some relocation, simple things like fire alarms that may not be in step with like a normal process. Once checked over that the existing product was at least similar or, matched the performance requirements, we could relocate it. So we had a schedule once talking with some of our other consultants. So by having these conversations, again, this is with the fire protection engineer. they were able to also sort of incorporate this sort of ideology into their workflow, which is, I think, really important for the success of some of these to get to that 10 quantity and the overall 30 products. So we also talked with the lighting engineers. There were some fixtures, emergency fixtures in the basement, kind of commodity elements. Found that they worked for the project, so included it in, and that's a really big carbon win for the project. And also by having the conversations with the client, they were very concerned with like the timing and moving from one building to another. They need people to stop work on Friday, be there on Monday, and be ready to go. So, but by having these conversations, we were able to kind of turn a no, we're not really sure into a yes, let's do it. We can phase it. We can get a whole bunch of stools and smaller equipment by like looking at the inventory. So we haven't really it's projects in construction. We haven't really crossed that bridge yet. So we'll see how it goes. And again, lots of kind of and then in aggregate, pretty big carbon wins for the project.
And just to say that there's a lot of ripples that we've had in the firm as a result of this project in terms of how it started to change and shape our firm culture and other projects that may not be pursuing LBC, because unfortunately not all of our projects do, as much as we would love to. And so one of the things that we actually, as Mickey mentioned, we had this like somewhat fear in the beginning of the project of like, how are we going to get to 30 salvage materials for this like 500,000 square foot lab? It just seemed like a daunting task. And so we actually had as part of some of the things that we started to learn as we went through, we had a reuse hackathon where we tried to crowdsource the ideas and like, let's see what other people have. How would we change details? How would we look at things? How would we incorporate it in other projects? What would we do to really make reuse something that is more common in our projects, and how would that start to influence design and really incorporate the larger office beyond just the project team? We've also started to really think about and explore of like, if we really wanted to have a truly circular renovation, how would we need to change our design process? And Simona, you had some slides in the beginning kind of alluding to this of like the flexibility needed as well as the technical rigor. And so just taking a very small example, we have two spaces in our office that we were looking to renovate. One was a mother's room and one was a quiet room, and looking at, okay, here's what's currently there. What would we do if we wanted to do it truly circular? What could we take out that actually could, and not send it to the landfill? Where could we take things from elsewhere in the office, or going to things like the Boston Building Reuse Center, seeing what's available, looking at, really like, these are small projects. We control the schedule, we control the budget, so we can take the time to really understand this. And what can we learn from that process? And so, as one example, we had the shelving that we were taking down. How could we salvage that, take it down in a way that we could reuse it and actually make that some of the casework in the mother's room potentially? We have another project that, currently also in construction, but was a little further behind in terms of the design process. It was an existing building as well, and really starting to take this notion of like, what's the inherent bones, literally in this case, of the building, and how can we take this notion of reuse? So in this case, we had some timber that needed to be removed for mechanical shafts, but it was this beautiful old timber building. I believe the building's from the 20s. And how can we like embrace that and understand the material and use that as a design opportunity? So taking a sample of it and starting to kind of use it in our wood shop to understand different ways that we could incorporate that into the design with different patterning and ways to kind of make feature elements within the within the project. And then lastly, we have a project that's currently finishing. It's in CDs. And so it's not done in design. So we're still exploring a lot of options, but it's a historic building from the 1930s. It's very large and it's currently sitting abandoned. And so one of the things and as I said, it's a historic building. And so there's a certain amount of historic preservation of like keeping things in kind or refurbishing, which certainly is a great reuse strategy. But we were also interested in really like embracing that and the elements that didn't need to have the historic character as much, or just materials that would otherwise be coming out of the building, because again, it's a huge building and there's a lot of materials, and starting to identify like, what are the opportunities, some of which made sense to keep going with, some of which didn't. So there were things like these beautiful wood benches. There's a lot of marble. It was actually in the bathroom partitions, but like, how do we embrace, and they're not staying there, but like, how do we embrace this like high value element that in a project that could otherwise not afford marble? How can we actually use that? As well as there's like large quantities of glazed block. and starting to look at things like this marble and how can we embrace that in the design and and reuse that and incorporate that in a new and modern way in those aspects of design. Or looking at things like this glazed block, which comes in kind of a variety of shapes and textures. And start to make feature walls and things that maybe take this material that we have large quantities of and really make it a signature design element. And so those are just some of the examples of how, we've tried, even learning from that project, we've been able to start to have some of these ripples and impacts on other projects that don't necessarily have the requirement of having salvage material, but really starting to incorporate into our design process, which of course we could always do more of, but starting to kind of have those ripples and impacts. And we just wanted to say there's lots of great resources out there in terms of interiors and reuse. There's the MFR Sustainability Tracker, Carbon Leadership Forum has some great resources, including one for tenant improvement. And that was everything that we had.
Yeah, there was a question. Thank you both
perfect.
for
Sorry.
an incredibly rich, dense presentation, and all of our presenters. There's just so much already happening in the reuse of interior materials and so much detail that's already known. We are at time. I know some people will need to drop off, but there was a question for the PAYET team. Can you elaborate on the mock-ups as reuse? Is an in-place mock-up considered reuse? Is a question here.
I think, yeah, we had lots of conversations about this. There was as part of the project, they had a small space. We were also testing out some new countertop materials, new flooring materials. So they gave us a little room to play with. That was in another building.
But it was not
so,
in place.
Yeah,
So that was
correct.
worth noticing. It was
Right.
the base building is under construction. And so the mock-up was actually off-site. Again, to both explore the new materials, as Mickey was mentioning. It's an LBC project, so certain things like the flooring they typically would use did not meet the requirements, and they wanted to make sure that they could, see, touch, experience, or chemicals on, understand how some of these things would work when we get to the full project. And so it's deconstructing them from the mock-up and then bringing them to the space. Simona, you're on mute.
Sure am. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and thanks to our audience for joining this webinar. And here is everyone's contact information, so please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions for our presenters. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.